Still here! I come into my pass, officer. Still here! I come to my pass. Give me your hand.
It is June 2023, a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. We are at the Toddington Services on the M1 motorway, a location that defines the mundane rhythm of British travel. It is a place of transient stops, where tired families grab stale coffee, truckers stretch aching legs, and commuters rush to use the restroom before merging back into the endless stream of traffic. It is anonymous, busy and public, the perfect camouflage for illicit business. Into this sea of weary travellers pulls a heavy goods vehicle. To the casual observer, it is nothing unusual. Just another lorry in a logistical network that keeps the country running. Moments later, a car slides into the parking bay alongside it. Behind the wheel sits Ahmed Omar, a London-based drug dealer who carries himself with the casual confidence of someone who has done this a dozen times before, in broad daylight, with motorists walking past eating sandwiches and checking their phones. A transaction worth more than most people earn in a lifetime takes place. Two heavy boxes are casually removed from the lorry's trailer and placed into the boot of Omar's car. The exchange is swift, practiced and brazen. What neither man realizes is that the anonymity they rely on has already been compromised. They are not alone. Unseen eyes are watching from unmarked vehicles positioned strategically around the parking lot. Police officers have been holding their breath for hours, sweating through the tension, waiting for this exact millisecond of incriminating action. As the boot clicks shut, the trap snaps. The swarming of officers is immediate. Inside those two cardboard boxes lies 36 kilograms of high-purity cocaine. But that is merely the appetizer. Hidden deep within the lorry behind them is another 155 kilograms. When the forensic accountants tallied the haul, the total street value came to a staggering $19.2 million. It was a massive victory for law enforcement, the kind of bust that makes headlines and secures promotions. But here is what makes this case truly shocking: that multi-million-dollar drug seizure was not the endgame. In the grand scheme of the criminal underworld, it was just a loose thread. When investigators pulled that thread, they did not just find more drugs. They unraveled a labyrinthine criminal ecosystem that would expose the UK's biggest chop shop network in recent history. This was an operation worth millions, involving 117 stolen vehicles, a fleet of high-end cars vanished from driveways, and faulty airbags sold to innocent families who had no idea they were driving. Death traps. This drug bust was merely the doorway into a criminal enterprise that had been running in plain sight for years, hiding behind the facade of legitimate business. Before we dissect the mechanics of this massive fraud, we need to understand the environment that allowed it to fester. It was not happening in shadowy back alleys, but right under our noses. The epicenter of this criminal earthquake was not the motorway, but the industrial heartlands of Birmingham in the West Midlands. Between 2017 and 2023, a sprawling network was established that relied entirely on the art of camouflage. To an outsider walking down Charles Henry Street or Cheapside in Digbeth, the operation looked entirely mundane. These were not masked men in dark alleys. They were men in high-visibility vests holding clipboards. They looked like legitimate businessmen running vehicle repair and resale companies. And in a twisted legal sense, half of their business was legitimate. At the top of the hierarchy sat Nadim Assad. Prosecutors would later paint a picture of him not as a thug, but as a CEO of crime. He was the architect, the man coordinating the complex logistics of sourcing, stripping and processing. Beside him were his lieutenants, Mohammed Nadim, the logistics manager handling the movement of vehicles, Zahir Hussain, who oversaw the influx of components, and Aman Zamir, the processor on the ground. On paper, their enterprise was watertight. They had tax returns, business premises, and most importantly, they had a paper trail that appeared to be squeaky clean. The genius of their scheme lay in a specific loophole within the automotive industry, the insurance write-off. To understand how they got away with it for so long, you have to understand the salvage auction system. When a car is involved in a serious crash, insurance companies often calculate that the cost of repairing it exceeds the vehicle's value. They declare it a total loss or a write-off. These twisted heaps of metal are then sold at salvage auctions. Buying them is perfectly legal. Mechanics do it to harvest spare parts. Hobbyists do it for restoration projects. So, when Nadim Assad and his crew showed up at these auctions, bidding on wrecked Mercedes, Audis and Range Rovers, nobody batted an eyelid. They had the auction records, the sales receipts, and the version 5C logbooks. But here is the critical piece of knowledge that the gang exploited. When you buy a write-off, you are not really paying for the twisted metal. You are paying for the identity of the car. You are buying the vehicle identification number VIN, and the legal right for that car to exist on the road. Once they purchased a write-off, they possessed something more valuable than gold in the criminal underworld, a legitimate history. That paperwork was the shield that allowed them to operate in broad daylight. It allowed the eventual rebuilt cars to pass through police checks and DVLA screenings that would otherwise trigger immediate red flags. However, the business model was not to lovingly restore these cars with factory new parts ordered from Germany. That would destroy their profit margins. Instead, the write-off was merely a ghost, a shell, waiting to be filled. Behind the scenes, the repairs were not being conducted with certified components. The gang had created a demand for parts that the legal market could not match in price. To fix the legal car, they needed a donor. And that donor was not coming from a shop. It was coming from someone's driveway. The salvage car provided the identity. The stolen car provided the organs. It was a sophisticated identity theft, not of people, but of machines. Once the paperwork was secured, the Frankenstein process began. The salvage car, battered and broken, was brought into one of the gang's many workshops scattered across Digbeth and Sparkhill. To the naked eye, these looked like bustling repair shops. But inside, they were operating a high-speed disassembly line that turned legitimate vehicles into dangerous hybrids. Think about that for a second. Put yourself in the shoes of the customer. You are looking for a used car, maybe a reliable Volkswagen Golf for your commute or a second car for the family. You find one online at a dealership that looks respectable. The price is fair, maybe $10,000, slightly cheaper than the market rate, but not so cheap as to be suspicious. You check the history. The logbook says it was an accident repair, but it has been fully restored. You pay the money, drive it home, and park it in your driveway, feeling good about the deal. You have absolutely no idea that you have just parked a crime scene outside your house. The reality beneath the bonnet was disturbing. The engine humming under the hood was not the original. It was stolen from a driveway in Hampshire. The dashboard electronics were ripped out of a Mercedes taken from Wiltshire. The entire interior might have come from a third vehicle stolen in Dorset. The paperwork said the car was one legitimate entity, but physically it was a patchwork of stolen property. This was not random scavenging. It was theft carried out to order. Police investigations later established a chilling efficiency to their supply chain. If the mechanics at the Birmingham workshop realized they needed a specific engine block, an airbag system, and a control unit to finish a rebuild, they would not call a parts supplier. They would put out a request to their theft teams. A matching vehicle, same make, same model, same year, would be sourced, targeted and stolen specifically to be harvested. The stolen cars did not need to be sold whole, which is risky and hard to hide. Instead, they were driven into the workshops and stripped down to the chassis in a matter of hours. Only what was needed was kept. The rest was crushed or abandoned. But the most terrifying aspect of this operation was not the theft. It was the negligence. As police began piecing together the scale of the Birmingham operation, they discovered that these rebuilt vehicles were already back on the road, and they were lethally unsafe. One specific case highlighted in court involved that seemingly perfect Volkswagen Golf sold for over $10,000. When forensic examiners stripped it down, they made a shocking discovery. The airbag system was critically compromised. Modern cars are complex computers. Airbags are not just balloons, they are explosive devices triggered by millisecond perfect sensors. If you rip an airbag system out of a stolen car and jam it into a salvage wreck without precise calibration and manufacturer-grade testing, the computer may not recognize it. In the event of a crash, the one safety feature designed to save your life might simply fail to deploy. The gang was selling cars where the safety systems were effectively dummy parts. This revelation shifted the entire investigation. It was not just about property crime anymore. It was about public safety. They were not just thieves. They were endangering lives for profit. While the Birmingham chop shops were busy welding stolen front ends onto salvage chassis, The supply chain that fed them was operating hundreds of miles away with military precision. Between February and October 2023, a ghost fleet of luxury vehicles began vanishing from driveways across southern England. Hampshire, Dorset, and Wiltshire became hunting grounds. The thefts occurred under the cover of darkness, but unlike the smash-and-grab tactics of the past, these crimes were defined by their silence. At the center of this acquisition network were George Barry and Benjamin Cross, two men from Southampton who police identified as the logistical organizers. They were not stealing random sedans. They were fulfilling a shopping list. They targeted high-value models, Range Rovers, Bentleys, Mercedes, Audis and Jaguars, cars that represent status and wealth. In total, 107 vehicles disappeared in just 8 months, but what baffled victims was the lack of violence. There were no smashed windows, no triggered alarms, and no sounds of forced ignition. Families would simply wake up, look out the window and find an empty patch of tarmac where their $80,000 asset had been parked the night before. This silence was achieved through a technological exploit known as a relay attack. To understand how Barry and Cross operated, you have to understand the convenience we have all become addicted to: keyless entry. In a modern car, the key fob is a radio transmitter. It constantly broadcasts a low-frequency signal, essentially shouting, "I am here," when you walk up to your car. The vehicle's antennas detect this specific encrypted signal. If the signal is strong, meaning the key is within a meter or two, the car unlocks, and the ignition button goes live. Manufacturers designed this for ease, but the thieves turned it into a vulnerability. Here is the frightening reality of how the gang operated. They worked in pairs, using signal-boosting relay devices, black boxes that can be bought on the dark web for a few $100s. One thief, holding the receiver, would creep up to the front door or living room window of a house. He was hunting for the signal from the car keys, which most people leave on a hallway table or a hook by the door. Once his device picked up the faint signal from the keys inside, it boosted and transmitted it to the second device held by his accomplice, standing next to the car on the driveway. The car is effectively tricked. It receives the boosted signal and thinks the owner is standing right next to the door. The mirrors unfold. The locks disengage, and the start button glows green. The thieves simply open the door, press the button, and drive away without ever touching the real key. The entire process takes less than 60 seconds. In some cases, the gang went even further, employing signal jammers. These devices flood the frequency band with noise. When a driver parks their car and walks away, pressing the lock button on their fob, the jammer blocks the command. The owner hears the click of the fob, assumes the car is locked, and walks away. But the car remains open, waiting for the thieves to return hours later. This was not just theft, it was a technological bypass of the entire concept of security. It is easy to get lost in the sophisticated technology of relay attacks and the clever legal loopholes of salvage auctions, viewing this as a victimless crime where insurance companies foot the Ilaga bill. But the reality on the ground was far uglier. For the people targeted by Barry and Cross, the theft was not just an administrative headache, it was a devastating blow to their livelihoods and their sense of safety. Take the case of one local tradesman, whose story was highlighted in court. He did not drive a luxury Bentley or a flash Range Rover. He drove a work van. It was his mobile office, his warehouse, and his paycheck, all rolled into one. While he slept, the gang used their silent technology to steal it from his driveway. When he woke up, he did not just lose a vehicle. He lost his ability to earn a living. Inside that van were $10,000 worth of specialized tools equipment he had spent years collecting, calibrating, and relying on. The ripple effect was immediate and catastrophic. Without his van and tools, he could not fulfill contracts. He had to cancel jobs, letting down customers and damaging his reputation. He could not pay his bills. In court, he estimated the total loss, factoring in the stolen assets, the vehicle, and the lost income, was over $40,000. It nearly broke him financially. Another victim, who had just finished making the final payment on his van, found it dumped at Western Shore near Southampton. But it was barely recognizable. The wiring had been ripped out, the engine stripped. It was a carcass left to rot. The vehicle he used to support his family was completely unusable. Victim after victim described the same haunting feeling, a profound sense of violation. It was not just about the money. It was the knowledge that strangers had been creeping around their homes in the dead of night, standing inches from their front doors while their children slept upstairs. The psychological scar of that invasion often lasted longer than the financial one. But while the victims were left picking up the pieces, the gang was dealing with a storage problem. Where do you hide the remains of over 100 vehicles? As police peeled back the layers of the Birmingham operation, they discovered the sheer industrial scale of the concealment. The gang had not just rented a garage, they had weaponized the logistics of the city. Investigators turned their attention to a series of storage facilities and executed warrants that revealed a mechanical graveyard. They searched 250 shipping containers. When they cracked open the heavy steel doors, the magnitude of the crime became undeniable. Around 30 of these containers were packed floor to ceiling with the harvested organs of stolen cars. Officers found rows of engines, stacks of gearboxes and piles of airbag modules and control units. It was a supermarket for criminals. Some containers held the dismantled remains of multiple vehicles, all tagged, stored, and ready to be injected into the rebuild process. Police were eventually able to scientifically link 117 stolen vehicles to the operation through forensic examination of these parts. However, investigators suspected this was a conservative estimate. Many vehicles had been so thoroughly dismantled, chassis numbers ground off, parts scattered across different rebuilds that they were impossible to trace. This was not a loose collection of car thieves. It was a factory line of destruction running with corporate efficiency. For years the operation ran with the smoothness of a corporate machine. Nadim Assad and his lieutenants had seemingly thought of everything. The legal cover of the salvage auctions, the dispersed network of workshops, and the unending supply of stolen vehicles. But every criminal enterprise, no matter how sophisticated, eventually succumbs to hubris. They get comfortable, they get greedy, and they underestimate the determination of their victims. In this case, the unraveling began, not with a brilliant police deduction, but with a frustrated car owner who refused to be a statistic. A man from Derby awoke to find his car gone. Like thousands of others, he felt the familiar sting of helplessness. But unlike most, he had a digital ace up his sleeve. He had installed a third-party tracking device, one hidden deep within the vehicle, separate from the manufacturer's system that thieves often know how to disable. Watching a blip on a screen, he traced his stolen vehicle all the way to a specific industrial unit in Sparkhill, Birmingham. He did not confront them, he called the police. That single GPS coordinate was the loose thread that investigators had been desperate for. A direct, real-time link between a reported theft and a physical location. When police pulled that thread, the entire tapestry began to unravel. Intelligence gathered from the Sparkhill site led officers to another garage in Digbeth. Inside, they found a ghost from the past, a Mercedes SL 400 valued at $70,000. This car had been stolen way back in 2017. Its discovery was a pivotal moment for the investigation. It proved that this was not a pop-up operation. The network had been hoarding, processing, and moving stolen metal for years. The Mercedes had not been exported or crushed. It had been absorbed into the ecosystem, waiting for its parts to be resurrected in a rebuild. With the physical nodes of the network identified, the police initiated a phase of intense, covert surveillance. They did not kick down doors immediately. Instead, they watched. For weeks, officers monitored the comings and goings at multiple premises on Charles Henry Street, Cheapside, and Grove Road. They tracked the movement of engines, the delivery of salvage wrecks, and the shifting of personnel. They built a pattern of life for the gang, documenting the hierarchy and the roles each man played. They needed to prove conspiracy, not just possession. When the hammer finally fell, it fell everywhere at once. In a synchronized dawn raid, tactical teams struck multiple locations across Birmingham. Police body-worn camera footage later released to the public captured the chaos. Officers swarmed into yards where tools were still scattered on workbenches, and cars sat half dismantled. The surprise was total. At one location, Aman Zamir, the man responsible for processing the vehicles, panicked. The footage shows him sprinting from the yard, desperate to escape the closing net. But in his haste, he ran himself into a dead end, becoming physically trapped between a wall and the side of a parked van. Even then, he fought, later earning an additional conviction for assaulting the officers who dragged him out. As the physical operation was being dismantled, forensic accountants were attacking the gang from a different angle: the money. They scrutinized the bank accounts of the ringleaders and found the telltale signs of money laundering. Large, unexplained cash deposits that could not possibly be generated by a legitimate mechanic's income. Nadim Assad, the CEO, had hundreds of thousands of pounds flowing through accounts that had no clear origin. The financial footprint confirmed what the car parts suggested. This was a multi-million-dollar industry built on theft. Justice is often a slow process, but when it finally arrived for the Birmingham chop shop gang, it was decisive. In 2019, the men who had turned Industrial Digbeth into a factory of fraud stood in the dock at Birmingham Crown Court. The sheer weight of the evidence, the forensic links to 117 vehicles, the mountains of paperwork, and the undeniable financial trails left them with nowhere to hide. The judge described their operation as organized, deliberate, and sustained. This was not a case of opportunism. It was a professional criminal enterprise that had run for years. Nadim Assad, the architect of the scheme, was handed the longest sentence, 7 years in prison. His logistics manager, Mohammed Nadim, received 6 years, while Zahir Hussain was jailed for 4.5 years. Erman Zamir, whose failed attempt to flee police was captured on camera, received 5 years, with extra time added for his assault on the officers. But the courts did not stop at prison time. In a follow-up hearing under the Proceeds of Crime Act, authorities clawed back over £183,000 from the gang, stripping them of the profits they had squeezed from their victims. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles south, the law was also catching up with the Ghost Fleet thieves. In late 2023, Southampton Crown Court passed judgment on the men who had terrorized driveways across 3 counties. Benjamin Cross, the ringleader who used technology to bypass security, was sentenced to 64 months. His accomplice, George Barry, received 56 months. The judge noted that their crimes had struck at the sanctity of the home, leaving victims feeling violated in the one place they should feel safe. But to truly understand the scale of the underworld economy, we must circle back to where we started, that mundane Tuesday afternoon at Toddington Services on the M1. While the chop shops were being dismantled and the car thieves were being tracked, the drug trafficking network linking Europe to the UK was also being severed. Rudy Claus, the Belgian truck driver who used his legitimate haulage business to move 191 kilograms of cocaine, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Ahmed Omar, the dealer caught receiving the handoff, was given nearly 9 years. 3 separate investigations. 3 distinct types of crime. One common thread. Whether it was the chop shop hiding behind salvage auctions, the car thieves hiding behind relay technology, or the drug smugglers hiding behind medical insulation boxes, they all relied on the same principle: camouflage. They operated in the open, exploiting the trust and the blind spots of a functioning society. The police played the long game, waiting, watching, and gathering intelligence until they could take down the entire network, rather than just the foot soldiers. They succeeded, removing millions of dollars of criminal assets and dangerous vehicles from the streets. But as these cells are dismantled, a disturbing question remains. If an operation this vast, processing hundreds of cars and moving millions in drugs, could run for years without detection, what else is happening right now in the industrial unit down the street, or the lorry parked at the service station? These cases prove that modern organized crime does not look like the movies. It looks like a repair shop. It looks like a delivery truck. It looks like business as usual. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous.